Thanks for stopping by Big Top Gaming. My name's Brian, and in this video we're going to be going over some list building strategies for Tywin Lannister, the Lord of Casterly Rock. So this video is being made as part of a request from one of my viewers, Lawyer, and this is only 5 months old now, so I'm getting pretty close to being caught up. I think I got 2 more of these to do, and then we'll be good. But this also comes at a pretty decent time because there's at current there's a tabletop simulator tournament going on with the greater A Song of Ice and Fire community, and the folks over at songoficeandfirestats.com have been pooling some of the metrics for the tournament in terms of what people are playing. And for Lannisters, good old Pappy Ty here is holding down the bottom with Jaime Lannister. So I think it's good to just get a gist for what Tywin does and what makes him maybe one of the lesser taken commanders in Lannisters. So to understand what Tywin Lannister is bringing to a Lannister force, let's take a look at his commander card. He is a field commander, which has plenty of benefits now with the most all of the scenarios. I think there's only 1 or 2. Well, I guess there's probably 3 because I don't play the hidden mission ones so much, and I'm pretty sure those don't have that benefit. But most of the ones that get played in competitive circuits do have scenarios that allow you to score more points if your commander happens to be sitting on an objective. And in addition to that, though, Tywin Lannister brings 2 really great abilities to the unit that he's in. He has the ability Intimidating, and when the unit he's in activates, one enemy within long range becomes weakened. The other ability that Tywin brings is Lannister Supremacy, and we see this on the Lannister Guardsmen, but this is just when the unit's attacked, and if they pass a panic test, the attacker has to roll a panic test themselves and suffers -2 to that roll. So there's a few units that we can utilize that or get a lot of use out of that, because since we're putting Tywin in the unit, we're not going to be able to get access to any stalwart attachments or the guard captain, so we're going to try and be looking for a decent morale unit to throw him into. But those are the 2 abilities that he brings, a way to push extra damage and ensure that his unit survives longer because he's putting weakened out, or at least to ensure that his pieces are. But when we look at the tactics cards that Tywin brings, we're going to see that Intimidating ability plays a lot more into what he's trying to do with his strategy in general. So the first card we come across is Exploit Weakness. This triggers when an enemy unit attacks before the attack dice are rolled. For each attack die roll of 1, that enemy suffers 1 automatic wound, and if you expend the weaken token to force them to reroll, they suffer +2 additional wounds. So this is a pretty good way to... It's kind of like another version of Lannister Supremacy. You're punishing your opponent for attacking you, so you've got the weaken token out on them already, hopefully, whether it was Tywin or some other thing that had put that there. And if they're throwing a decent number of attack dice, remember, if you're thinking about just stats, which are magical and don't really matter a whole lot when it comes to actually playing, at least in my opinion, if they're rolling 6 or more dice, it's probable that they're going to get at least a 1, and if they're not charging, that probability goes way up. But now if we throw in the weaken token on top of that, we're also going to increase that chance of getting those ones. So it's really just fishing to try and get these extra wounds out, and Exploit Weakness just kind of gives you a little bit of an ability to put damage on something in a way where you wouldn't be able to otherwise. So just wound multiplication coming off of this card. The next one is the Lion's Wrath. This triggers at the start of a friendly turn. You can make 1 enemy combat unit weakened. There's no range restriction or anything, so you can pick it anywhere on the table. And then until the end of the round, all weakened enemies suffer -1 speed and trigger disorderly charges on a 1 or a 2. So this card is never bad. Like sometimes we see commander cards that are better off in the early game, and then some that are better off in the late game. But with the Lion's Wrath, having no range restriction on any of this card means that you're going to be able to kind of like thwart your opponent's plans for charging. And if they decide to not charge with something in order to remove weakened tokens via the tactics board or something like that, you've got the ability to, or not the tactics board, well, yeah, the tactics board, but the tactics position is the one that we would be taking. We would want to try and take the missive. I always refer to it as the missive, so I don't know why I confused it with tactics board for that one. But if your opponent takes the coin to remove a condition token, then you've got the chance to follow up and get those weakened tokens back out. So you can, there's no way for your opponent to really get out from under this one if you're using this early. Towards the later part of the game or later parts of the activation, like late activation, probably not the greatest because you won't get the most results out of it. But if it's going to help you win or help a unit survive more, then, no worries, more power to you for playing it then. But in the late game, it just means that your opponent's going to have to dig a lot deeper to make their charges matter, and they're going to be less impactful because you've got that increased chance of disorderlies, and you have the weakened token that comes with this too, so you can then waterfall into exploit weakness or something else. The last card that Tywin brings is Lannister Intimidation. This also triggers at the start of any turn, so they don't have quite the same trigger. It's almost the same. It does mean that you can't play the Lion's Wrath and Lannister Intimidation at the same time because of the little friendly clause that's in there. They both share the same trigger. It's just the other one can be, the Lannister Intimidation can be done on the start of your opponent's turn as well. But with this one, you can expend a weakened token from an enemy unit, and then that unit loses all their abilities until the end of the round. So Tywin brings a pretty serious element of control, whether it be the control that comes from exploit weakness. If you want to consider limiting or doing wounds outside of activation as more of a control-y aspect, I think it's like defensive and aggressive at the same time. But the Lion's Wrath and Lannister Intimidation control the game in a pretty profound way. So we can take units that we're probably a little bit more scared of because we might not have the greatest plan for something like a bunch of Tully Cavaliers or other rule-packed units, and then have just Lannister Intimidation backing us up to make sure that we can stop our opponent from doing really dangerous things to us, or at least hinder units that would normally just steamroll through some of our stuff. The next thing I'd like to look at is what unit is going to be the best home for Tywin. So in the early existence of this commander, I often put him in Warrior Sons. They were pricey, but they had a good morale stat, so Lannister Intimidation was going to go off more likely than not. And it was a unit that you could move around the table with and get Tywin into places where your opponent would not appreciate, and he would ultimately, or they would ultimately have to deal with whatever Tywin was doing. And it's hard to negotiate that with the Warrior Sons there. Currently, I'm not super jazzed on the Warrior Sons, so I've opted to grab some House Bolton Blackguard. And they're slow, which is unfortunate, but having Intimidation be at long range means you should be able to apply this where you want to, and then Tywin can kind of exist more as a defensive bunker, and your opponent is extremely de-incentivized to go after this unit. They have a above average morale stat, so Lannister Intimidation should be going off more likely than not. They have a fantastic save, decent combat output, but then the combination of Horrific Visage and Lannister Intimidation is just extra ways to get wounds when your opponent might not be wanting to do that. Exploit Weakness is another thing. So if you combine Horrific Visage with Exploit Weakness and Lannister Intimidation, you're looking at your opponent taking a lot of wounds or opportunity to take a lot of wounds just from opting to attack Tywin's unit. So we can kind of leave this one and let them run around the table doing what they want. Not so much like how the Warrior Sons could do, but for the most part, I don't think your opponent's going to want to come near the House Bolton Blackguard with Tywin in that list, or in that unit. The next one that I want to take is the Knights of Casterly Rock. So I think this unit has kind of fixed itself as the go-to combat unit in any Lannister list. They have a lot of innate maneuverability because they're cavalry. and they do a ton of work with the Lance special rule, and they happen to have Lannister supremacy as well with a 6+ morale stat, so that means that they're also going to be able to do quite a bit of work, and normally, it's not that they normally would, but they're more likely to one-shot a unit that they go into, especially if you're doing anything like crown zapping them or putting wounds on them through other means. I wouldn't say that with this list I would want the Knights of Casterly Rock kind of leading the vanguard on things. I kind of would want them to move up along with the rest of the army at the same pace, and then just kind of get to where they need to based on where most of the heat is coming or where the scenario pressure is coming at you, and then get them to kind of go to that side and start helping unjam other units that might be over there. I think they're a great tag team unit, and that's kind of how I feel about cavalry in general, and especially if you only have one unit of cavalry like this in your list. Like, if we go back to the double Tully Cavalier thing, those guys can run around and do whatever they want because you do have two of them and a lot of support baked into them otherwise. But with the Knights of Casterly Rock, they're a highly valuable unit, and I don't want them to be running out on their own and giving my opponent the opportunity to kind of like double team them and take them down or jam them up to where they're really not doing anything in combat. The next unit that I'm going to be taking are the Bloody Mummer Skirmishers. Now, this is a unit I don't think I've gotten a chance to really talk about in any other list build recently, and the unit is pretty decent. They cost 6 points, so a little bit more. You're paying that extra point over something like the Lannister Guardsmen or the Cutthroats, but what you do get out of here is some interesting synergy with Tywin and how Tywin plays. So they have the Mummer's Blade ability, which if they target a unit that's not activated with an attack, that enemy becomes weakened. So this is another way to apply a weakened token to an enemy unit. And then the next ability they have is really interesting. It's called Parry. So when that unit, or when the Mummer unit is attacked with melee, for each attack die roll of 1, they suffer 1 wound. So this is almost like they have exploit weakness baked in, and with that weakened token up there, whether it's Tywin putting it on or the Mummers putting it on with the Mummer's Blade, you're going to increase those chances of 1 just like you would with exploit weakness. But it is really important to note here that exploit weaknesses wounds and parries wounds stack. Even though they're very similarly worded, they're not the same effect. So if someone wants to try and attack the skirmishers, they're always going to have to be on guard if you haven't played a lot of your exploit weakness cards, because you're always left with the opportunity to do a boatload of wounds. That's 2 wounds for every 1 they roll, and then you're also going to be triggering, more likely than not, you'll be triggering that extra bonus on exploit weakness, so it's another 2 wounds on top of that. This ability alone could really cripple a unit that's coming into you, and then the skirmishers could just take care of it themselves. They hit on 3s, so their combat capabilities are pretty strong, and their stats are really middle of the road. They don't have a great save, but they've got a decent morale. So I think this unit's going to be really good for Tywin, and the thing about this unit with Parry and the Mummer's Blade, they never really lose any effectiveness as they start peeling off ranks. You know, you're going to lose the attacks, but you're still going to be able to get a lot of use out of the 2 rules they have baked in. So I think this is a really great unit for Tywin to bring along with him. I have also opted to put Meryn Trant in this unit, and I know it sounds kind of screwbally to have a unit that has the Mummer's Blade rule to also get Meryn Trant, because typically you would just think that Meryn Trant would be putting out weakened tokens to try and help forward Tywin's thing and keep the Mummers safe, but Meryn Trant also puts out any other tokens, so you can put out vulnerable tokens a little bit deeper in the army, or start stacking weakened tokens for when you're under the Lion's Wrath. That's another good way to use this unit. You know, get the Mummer's Blade to weaken the unit they're attacking, and then Meryn Trant weakens something else, and then there's just a bunch of horrible charge options all over the place. Also, the panic tokens can be helpful here too if you've got something that's tied up with Tywin or the Knights of Casterly Rock. This way you can just get the Lannister supremacy to go off a little bit more regularly or a little bit more easy. The last combat unit we're bringing are Lannister Crossbowmen. I think that this unit is almost like a staple for me in Lannister builds for the most part. I think for Faith builds and maybe more melee-centric builds, it's not so much, but for every other type of Lannister list that I build, I'm typically putting one of these in. And their stats are fantastic when it comes to attacking. They hit on 3s. They're rolling 7 dice for most of the time they exist, so you're not too worried about them getting crown zapped or something like that and having ranks peel off early. All you need to do is just heal a little bit and they get their effectiveness back. But the main reason why I like having that, or the best attachment for them, I think, in terms of like creating a great module, is Preston Greenfield. Preston Greenfield allows you to draw a card every time you make an action, and as long as you own the crown at least. But for the Crossbowmen, it means that if you get the opportunity to take the swords, you should be able to draw cards off of this attachment, and then they'll be able to shoot again and you draw cards. Like, all of the Lannister cards in the base tactics deck are really strong and really controlling, and Tywin's cards are also great. Whenever I get someone who's stacked with a lot of effective cards like this, I typically like to bring Tyrion with me, the NCU Tyrion, just so I can burn through that deck faster. But at least Preston Greenfield's going to help me with drawing more cards, and I don't think I'm going to have a problem grabbing the crown with this list. And that takes us up to our NCUs. So we do only have 4 combat units with this list, but there are a lot of elite ones in here, and we are bringing 3 NCUs. The first one, I think, is one that is really difficult to not take with Tywin, and that's Pycelle. First off, he's a 3-point NCU, and if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure it's the only NCU that Lannisters have access to that's 3 points. You'll have to forgive me, I don't play Lannisters as much as I should, but I'm pretty sure he's the only one. So his ability Manipulation and Deception just lets him put out a weaken token whenever he takes any zone, and that's not based on the stipulation of him having to give up the ability of that zone. So we're getting whatever we take, and we're getting a weaken token out, and that is very helpful for Tywin. The next NCU that I'm taking is Walder Frey, and this helps me build a little bit closer to the control mechanic, because with Lannister Intimidation, we can shut off units by expending weaken tokens, and then Walder Frey can let us shut off units just by influencing them as well. So we end up taking some of our units that aren't so survivable, things like the skirmishers or the crossbowmen, and giving them that bit of extra insurance that they won't have to worry about some really tough and scary unit coming in at them and just wiping them out with superior combat rules or anything like that. And Walder Frey, it doesn't go without saying that he at least does wounds to them. So when we're talking about stacking a bunch of wounds with parry or exploit weakness, we can get a few extra hits there, and it might be enough to push the unit to being wiped out and not having to waste another activation. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And I think the last one that I've added to this list is mostly here just to make sure that Meryn Trant, Preston Greenfield, and Walder Frey are always going to be on, and that's Joffrey Baratheon. So we don't have the kind of morale stats in this list to really feel like the panic token is incidental. The panic token is going to hurt us quite a bit, but having control of the crown at all times to make sure that if we want to take the combat zone right away and have those Lannister bowmen shoot and be able to draw a card off of that, we don't have to worry about not having the crown zone to make that happen. We don't have to worry about our opponent trying to sweep out the crown zone out from under us in order to make sure that Walder Frey doesn't go off when it's not our turn. I think that those benefits outweigh the downside of having a bunch of panic tokens out on our units. Plus, it also gives us the opportunity or the incentive to take the coin zone, which the Lannister tactics deck wants anyways. But this way we can try and mitigate some of what Joffrey's doing by removing those tokens, and then also stopping our opponent from taking that zone, because they'll also want to start removing some of those weakened tokens once they catch on to what we're doing. So the small discussion then is, why is Tywin Lannister sitting towards the bottom of the pile? And I mean, he's not at the bottom. I think Jaime's just a little bit lower than him. So I think that the Lannister pool has kind of adapted to the meta that's formed, and most of the answers to what's happening in competitive ice and fire play seems to be helped out by having something like the High Sparrow and the Mountain as commanders. I think that those are really strong choices, and Tyrion's commander version also is a really great choice. And when you look at what those three are bringing, the Sparrow brings a ton of survivability and can increase combat output, so you're always being able to focus on that combat deal. He also, as a free NCU, allows Lannisters to kind of free up some points to put more combat units on the table, since most of theirs are quite expensive. And then the Mountain Commander just has a slew of cards that crank up combat capabilities to 11 and allow for some really big plays when your opponent's not expecting them. He kind of controls the game in a different way. And Tyrion Lannister is just a phenomenal phenomenal control commander. So naturally, someone's got to start falling towards the bottom. And even though I don't think Tywin is a bad commander, or that there needs to be something done to change him, he's just kind of a victim of his environment more so than anything. And I don't think that, like I said, I don't think that makes him bad. I just think that there are others that are doing kind of what the meta demands without Tywin being able to take part in it. But I think that this list actually has a lot of legs in things that are going on today, because people are bringing more power units, or they're bringing a lot of units. So I think that's where the divide is. It's like, and I know that kind of sounds reductive, because that's like every list. You're either taking a ton of activations, or you're taking just a bunch of elite stuff. But I think Tywin plays well into the elite armies, because with this list, at least, he can shut off a bunch of stuff through Walder and Lannister intimidation. But when it comes to dealing with these big hordes that people are bringing, or even something like a Baratheon list that has 3 NCUs and 5 combat units hitting the table, I think that's where Tywin kind of struggles a little bit, just because he can't keep up with all of the weakened tokens and can only center in on a couple things at a time. So I would need to play more games with him in order to really feel how that works out. But unfortunately, I only have so many games with Tywin under my belt, and even Lannisters at that rate. So if you are a regular Lannister player, give this list a try and let me know what you think in the comments below. Otherwise, I think next up we're going to try and knock out another request for Roderick, and then after that I'll finally start talking about some Targaryens, as I've had some time to play with them a little bit more. And then if you are watching this and haven't subscribed to the channel, consider subscribing. And then I post these kind of at random times and don't always notify people through all of the public or the social media platforms right when they go out. So if you hit that notification bell, you'll know when my videos come out, so you can watch them right away. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to making the next one for you.